They say money reveals who people really are. I learned the opposite. Money reveals who is willing to judge you before they know your name. The crystal chandeliers above me scattered golden light across the ballroom, making everything sparkle except my confidence. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the silver tray balanced against my hip. 200 guests filled the Harrington Estate ballroom, their laughter mixing with the soft notes of a string quartet hidden somewhere beyond the marble columns. Every glass of champagne in the room probably cost more than the groceries I bought in a week. I kept my eyes down and focused on my work. That was the rule. Smile. Serve. Stay invisible. It had worked for almost 8 months. Until tonight. Grace. The voice came from behind me. Sharp. Elegant. Dangerous. I turned and found Victoria Harrington standing near the grand staircase. Even at 62, she carried herself like royalty. Diamonds glittered at her neck. The room seemed to bend around her presence. "Yes, ma'am?" I asked. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Bring another bottle to table 7. "Of course." I moved quickly through the crowd, weaving between politicians, CEOs, and socialites. Every few feet I caught pieces of conversations about stock prices, vacation homes, private jets, and investment portfolios large enough to solve every problem I'd ever had. Normally, I ignored it. Tonight felt different. Like a thunderstorm gathering somewhere beyond the windows. My stomach had been tight all evening. Maybe because Ethan Harrington hadn't stopped looking at me. The billionaire stood near the fireplace speaking with investors. His black tuxedo fit perfectly. Cameras loved him. Business magazines loved him. Half the women in Manhattan probably loved him. But every time I glanced in his direction, his attention drifted back to me. That should have made me nervous. Instead, it made me feel seen. Which was somehow worse. I turned away before anyone noticed. Unfortunately, someone already had. "There she is." Chloe Harrington's voice carried easily across the room. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. My feet stopped moving. Chloe stepped forward holding a champagne glass. Her designer gown shimmered beneath the lights. The smile on her face looked rehearsed. The famous maid. A few guests laughed politely. My cheeks warmed. "Excuse me?" I managed. Chloe raised her glass. "I just think it's inspiring." More eyes settled on me. More whispers. More curiosity. "What's inspiring?" someone asked. Chloe's smile widened. "That a housemaid can dream so big." The laughter grew louder. I felt every stare in the room pressing against my skin. "Chloe," a voice warned from somewhere behind her. "Ethan." But she ignored him. After all, she continued, most gold diggers at least try to hide it. The ballroom went silent. Completely silent. I could hear the faint clink of ice inside someone's glass. My heart hammered so hard I thought everyone might hear it. Across the room, Ethan took a step forward. His expression darkened. Victoria Harrington watched quietly. Waiting. Measuring. Judging. Every wealthy face in the room seemed frozen in anticipation. Waiting to see what the maid would do. Waiting to see if I would cry. Defend myself. Run. I slowly set my tray onto a nearby table. Then I looked directly at Chloe Harrington. And for the first time that night, I smiled. Because she had no idea who she was talking to. I had always believed that the rich lived in a different world. 3 months earlier, I discovered that they did. The first thing I noticed about Harrington Estate was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The expensive kind. The kind that came from acres of private land, perfectly trimmed gardens, and walls thick enough to keep the rest of the world outside. My old Honda rattled slightly as I parked near the service entrance. I sat there for a moment gripping the steering wheel. My new uniform hung neatly on the passenger seat beside me. The rent was due in 6 days. My younger brother's college tuition bill was due in 12. Failure was not an option. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the cool September morning. The mansion looked less like a home and more like something that belonged in a movie. Tall stone columns. Massive windows. 3 stories of wealth I could not even imagine. A woman named Mrs. Dawson, the head housekeeper, met me inside. She moved quickly, carrying a clipboard and the kind of authority that came from running a household larger than most hotels. Stay organized, stay professional, and do not bother Mr. Harrington unless absolutely necessary, she said as we walked through hallways lined with artwork worth more than my entire apartment building. Understood. Most employees never speak more than a few words to him. That sounded easy enough. Unfortunately, life rarely cared about my plans. My first encounter with Ethan Harrington happened less than an hour later. I was carrying a box of freshly pressed linens toward the West Wing when I turned a corner too fast. The box slipped. White sheets spilled across the polished floor. And I walked directly into someone. Coffee splashed across the front of an expensive charcoal suit. My stomach dropped. Oh no. The words escaped before I could stop them. The man standing in front of me looked down at the stain spreading across his jacket. Then he looked at me. Steel gray eyes. Sharp jawline. Dark hair. Calm expression. I recognized him immediately from magazines displayed near grocery store checkout counters. Ethan Harrington. Billionaire founder. Business genius. One of the most photographed men in America. And I had just thrown coffee on him. I am so sorry, I said quickly. I did not see you. He glanced at the coffee. Then at the linen scattered everywhere. Clearly. His voice was low and controlled. Not angry. Somehow that made it worse. I dropped to my knees gathering sheets as fast as possible. Heat flooded my face. I can pay for the cleaning. The moment the words left my mouth, I realized how ridiculous they sounded. His suit probably cost more than my car. For a second, I thought I saw amusement flicker across his face. Can you? I froze. Then, unexpectedly, he bent down and picked up one of the fallen sheets. Billionaires were not supposed to pick up linens. That seemed like an unwritten rule somewhere. He handed it back to me. First day? He asked. Is it that obvious? Very. Great. Exactly the impression I wanted to make. I stood and accepted the sheet. Thank you. He studied me for a moment. Not in a rude way. More like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Relax, Grace. Nobody is getting fired over coffee. My eyes widened slightly. You know my name? I signed the payroll checks. Then he turned and continued down the hallway. I stood there holding the linens and staring after him. That should have been the end of it. A brief embarrassing moment forgotten by lunch. But just before he disappeared around the corner, he paused. One more thing. I looked up. Welcome to Harrington Estate. And somehow those 4 words stayed with me for the rest of the day. I thought billionaires spent their evenings at glamorous parties, signing million-dollar deals and appearing on magazine covers. Ethan Harrington spent his evenings alone. I discovered that by accident about 3 weeks after I started working at the estate. The grandfather clock in the main hallway had just struck 10. Most of the staff had already gone home. I was finishing a few extra tasks because overtime meant a little more money, and a little more money meant one less thing to worry about at the end of the month. The mansion felt different at night. The endless hallways were quieter. The polished floors reflected the soft glow of wall sconces. Outside, autumn rain tapped gently against the tall windows. I was carrying fresh towels toward the east wing when I noticed light spilling from beneath the library doors. That was unusual. The room was normally empty after sunset. Curious, I slowed my pace as I passed. Through the narrow gap, I caught a glimpse of Ethan sitting alone at a massive wooden desk. He was not working. At least not the way I expected. No laptop. No phone calls. No assistants. Just a single lamp casting warm light across stacks of unopened books. He stared out the window into the darkness beyond the glass. Motionless. Lost somewhere far away. For a moment, he looked less like one of the richest men in America and more like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see. I quickly looked away and continued walking. It was none of my business. Or at least that was what I told myself. The next night, I saw him again. This time in the dining room. The table could seat 20 people comfortably. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath a chandelier larger than my entire living room. One place setting sat at the far end. Just one. Ethan ate dinner alone in a room built for celebrations. The sight stayed with me longer than I expected. Over the following weeks, I began noticing small things. He arrived home late almost every night. He rarely attended family gatherings held at the estate. He often skipped lunch entirely. Sometimes I found untouched trays returned to the kitchen hours later. The staff respected him. They spoke highly of him. Yet nobody seemed to know him. One chilly Thursday evening, I found myself working later than usual. My brother Liam had called earlier about a tuition payment issue, and I needed the extra hours more than ever. As I organized supplies in the kitchen, I noticed someone standing by the coffee machine. Ethan. He looked exhausted. His tie hung slightly loose. Shadows lingered beneath his eyes. He rubbed the bridge of his nose as the machine slowly filled a mug. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he glanced at the clock. "You are still here?" he asked. "Extra shift. Long day?" I laughed softly. "Long month." To my surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted. "Fair answer." The machine beeped. He reached for the mug, but before he could pick it up, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and sighed. Not annoyed. Tired. Deeply tired. He silenced the call without answering. Then another call appeared almost immediately. He silenced that one too. I pretended not to notice. "Everything okay?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. His eyes met mine. For a second, something vulnerable flashed across his face. Gone almost instantly. "Just business." I nodded. People always said that. Usually it meant the opposite. He picked up the coffee and turned toward the door. Then he paused. "Grace?" "Yes?" "Do not stay too late." I blinked. "Why?" "Because nobody should spend every night working." With that, he disappeared down the hallway. I stood there staring at the empty doorway. The strange thing was not what he said. It was how he said it. Like someone speaking from experience. And for the first time, I began to wonder if all that wealth had cost him something nobody else could see. The smallest acts of kindness are usually the ones people remember forever. October arrived with colder mornings and shorter days. The gardens around Harrington Estate turned shades of gold and amber, and the giant maple trees lining the driveway scattered leaves across the stone paths every afternoon. Life settled into a routine. I worked. I paid bills. I worried about Liam's tuition. And somehow, without realizing it, I started looking forward to the moments when I crossed paths with Ethan. They were never dramatic. Never the kind of scenes people write about in novels. Just small moments. One rainy morning, I arrived at work soaked after my windshield wipers stopped working halfway through the drive. I spent the first hour trying to hide the damp sleeves of my uniform. Around noon, Mrs. Dawson handed me a box. "This was left for you." Inside was a new umbrella. Simple. Black. High quality. No note. No explanation. I stared at it for several seconds. "Who bought this?" Mrs. Dawson shrugged. I was told it belonged to an employee who needed it. I already knew. A week later, I found Ethan standing outside the library staring at a framed photograph. The image showed an older man smiling beside a much younger version of him. There was something sad about the way he looked at it. Something unfinished. Neither of us spoke about the photograph. Instead, I asked whether he wanted coffee. Please, he answered. The next morning, he remembered exactly how I took mine. Another small thing. Another detail most people would overlook. Then came the evening that changed something between us. I was finishing work when my phone rang. Liam. The second I answered, I heard panic in his voice. His car had broken down nearly 40 miles from campus. He had an exam the next morning and barely enough money for gas, let alone repairs. I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how to help. Tow trucks were expensive. Ride shares were unavailable in that area. I sat alone in the kitchen staring at numbers that refused to work. You look worried. I looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway holding a cup of coffee. Family problem, I admitted. My brother. He listened quietly while I explained. No interruptions. No advice. Just listening. When I finished, he nodded once. Send me the location. What? Send me the location. Ethan, I cannot ask you to solve my problems. Good thing you are not asking. I opened my mouth to argue. He raised one eyebrow. Somehow, that ended the discussion. The next morning, Liam called sounding happier than I had heard in months. A mechanic had appeared. The repairs were completed. Everything was handled. I knew exactly who was responsible. That evening, I found Ethan working in his office. Thank you, I said softly. He did not look up immediately. When he finally did, there was no expectation in his eyes. No desire for praise. How did the exam go? He asked. He passed. A faint smile appeared. Good. That was it. No speech. No reminder of the favor. Nothing. As I walked away, I realized something important. Most people noticed Ethan Harrington's money first. I was starting to notice his heart. And that frightened me more than it should have. People become very interested in your life the moment they cannot understand your place in someone else's. November arrived with colder winds and longer shadows. The estate prepared for the holiday season. Decorations appeared in every hallway. Fresh pine wreaths hung from grand staircases. The staff worked harder than ever as guests came and went almost daily. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Underneath, something had changed. I started noticing it in the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. In the way certain employees exchanged glances when Ethan and I happened to speak. Small things. Easy to dismiss. At first. One afternoon, I walked into the staff lounge and found two housekeepers sitting quietly at a table. The moment they saw me, both stopped talking. One offered an awkward smile. The other suddenly became very interested in her coffee. I pretended not to notice. But I did. Later that week, Mrs. Dawson called me into her office. She folded her hands neatly on her desk. Grace, I need to ask you something. My stomach tightened immediately. Of course. Are you having any personal relationship with Mr. Harrington? The question hit me like cold water. What? That is not an answer. No, I said quickly. Absolutely not. She studied me for a few seconds. Then nodded. Good. Why are you asking? Mrs. Dawson sighed. Because people are talking. I left her office with a knot in my chest. People were talking. About what? About coffee conversations? About simple acts of kindness? About a billionaire remembering my brother's name? The whole thing felt ridiculous. Until I realized it was not. A few days later, I discovered just how far the rumors had spread. I was polishing silver in one of the smaller dining rooms when I heard voices coming from the hallway. Chloe Harrington. And someone else. I am telling you, Chloe said. Nobody spends that much time noticing a maid unless she gives them a reason. My hands froze. Maybe they are just friends, the other woman suggested. Chloe laughed. Please. Girls like her always have a plan. The words stung more than I expected. Not because Chloe knew me. Because she did not. She had never asked a single question about my life. Never cared where I came from. Never bothered learning anything beyond my job title. Yet somehow she had already decided exactly who I was. That night, I drove home feeling heavier than usual. My apartment building looked exactly the same as always. Cracked sidewalks. Flickering hallway lights. A laundry machine that only worked when it felt generous. Real life. My life. I climbed 3 flights of stairs and found Liam studying at the kitchen table. Rough day? He asked immediately. I forced a smile. Something like that. He looked at me carefully. Do not let rich people make you forget who you are. I laughed softly. Is that your expert advice? Absolutely. He pointed his pencil at me. You have spent your whole life helping everyone else. Anybody who cannot see that is not worth worrying about. His words stayed with me. The next morning, I returned to the estate determined to ignore the gossip. But as I stepped through the front entrance, I noticed something unusual. 2 unfamiliar men stood near the reception area speaking quietly with Victoria Harrington. They both carried folders. Thick folders. One of them glanced in my direction. Then opened the file and looked directly at my photograph clipped inside. Victoria followed his gaze. Her expression remained perfectly calm. Which somehow made it worse. Because in that moment, I realized the rumors had moved beyond whispers. Someone was investigating me. Nothing spreads faster than a lie people want to believe. By the second week of December, the atmosphere inside Harrington Estate had changed completely. Nobody said anything directly to my face. They did not have to. I felt it every time I entered a room. Every conversation that stopped. Every glance that lingered a little too long. Every smile that felt forced. The investigation had apparently produced nothing useful. If anything, that seemed to frustrate Victoria and Chloe even more. They had searched for hidden debts. Secret relationships. Criminal records. Financial schemes. They found an overworked maid living in a modest apartment, helping her younger brother finish college, and paying every bill on time. The truth should have ended the rumors. Instead, it made people invent new ones. One afternoon, I walked into the staff dining room carrying my lunch. 2 employees were sitting near the window. They immediately went silent. I sat alone at a corner table and opened my sandwich. A few seconds later, one of them spoke just loudly enough for me to hear. Funny how some people get promoted without actually getting promoted. The other laughed. I stared at my lunch. My appetite disappeared. Later that evening, things became worse. The estate hosted a private holiday gathering for close family and business associates. Extra staff had been scheduled to assist. I spent most of the evening carrying trays and avoiding attention. Unfortunately, attention found me anyway. I was arranging desserts when I heard my name. Chloe stood beside a group of elegantly dressed guests. Her smile looked harmless. It never was. Grace, she called. Come here for a moment. Every instinct told me not to. But refusing was not an option. I approached carefully. Yes, Miss Harrington? We were just discussing ambition. Several guests chuckled politely. And? I asked. I thought you might have valuable insight. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. The guests watched with open curiosity. One woman lifted a champagne glass and smiled. You must enjoy working here. I do. Especially lately, Chloe added. More laughter. Small. Controlled. Sharp. I understood exactly what she was doing. They wanted me embarrassed. Defensive. Angry. Anything that would confirm the version of me they had already created in their minds. I took a slow breath. I enjoy working with good people, I answered. The woman's smile faded slightly. Chloe's eyes narrowed. That is not what I meant. I know. Silence settled over the group. For the first time, nobody seemed quite sure what to say. I excused myself and returned to work. My hand shook for the next hour. Not because I was intimidated. Because I was tired. Tired of being judged by people who had never struggled for anything. Tired of defending a version of myself that only existed in their imagination. Near midnight, the party finally ended. Guests departed. Staff cleaned. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows. I was gathering empty glasses when Ethan entered the room. One look at my face and his expression changed. What happened? He asked quietly. Nothing. He did not believe me. Grace. The concern in his voice nearly broke something inside me. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything. Every rumor. Every insult. Every whisper. Instead, I forced a smile. Just a long day. He studied me carefully. Then his gaze shifted toward the doorway where Chloe had disappeared minutes earlier. Something cold settled behind his eyes. Not anger. Understanding. The dangerous kind. And when he looked back at me, he said 5 words that made my heart skip. I know they are lying. The people who hurt you the most are rarely strangers. They are usually the ones who smile while doing it. Christmas week arrived wrapped in snow and expensive decorations. Harrington Estate looked like something from a holiday movie. Thousands of white lights glowed across the property. Garlands lined every staircase. A 30-foot Christmas tree stood in the main ballroom, covered in crystal ornaments that reflected light in every direction. Guests began arriving days before the annual Harrington Christmas Gala. Politicians. Investors. Celebrities. People whose names appeared in magazines and financial news broadcasts. The staff worked from sunrise until late into the night preparing for the event. I welcomed the exhaustion. It gave me something else to think about. Unfortunately, avoiding my problems had become impossible. Since that conversation in the dining room, Ethan seemed more distant. Not colder. Just quieter. More careful. Almost as if he was trying to protect me from something. Or someone. The realization bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I was arranging floral centerpieces in one of the reception halls when I heard voices coming from the adjoining room. Victoria. Chloe. And Ethan. Their discussion sounded tense. You are making a mistake, Victoria said sharply. I disagree. Ethan's voice remained calm. You always disagree lately. Silence followed. Then Chloe spoke. Everybody sees what is happening except you. I should have walked away. Instead, I froze. Nothing is happening, Ethan replied. That is exactly the problem, Victoria answered. People are talking. My stomach tightened. People will always talk. Then stop giving them reasons. The room fell silent again. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every instinct told me Ethan would defend me. Tell them the rumors were ridiculous. End this once and for all. Instead, his next words stopped me cold. This conversation is over. That was it. No defense. No explanation. No denial of what they were saying about me. Just an attempt to end the discussion. I stepped away from the doorway before anyone noticed me. My hands shook as I returned to work. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Rationally, I knew Ethan had not agreed with them. But emotionally, it felt different. For months he had seen the rumors spreading. He knew they were wrong. Yet he had never publicly challenged them. Never once told his family to stop. Maybe he thought staying silent was protecting me. But silence has a strange way of sounding like agreement when you are the one standing alone. That evening, snow drifted gently outside the library windows. I was returning a stack of books when Ethan walked in. "Grace." I turned. His expression softened immediately. "You look tired." I almost laughed. Tired was not the word. Hurt was closer. "Long day." He nodded slowly. "Mine too." For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than usual. Finally he stepped closer. "Is something wrong?" The question nearly broke my heart. Because he genuinely did not know. He had no idea what his silence had cost me. I forced a smile. The kind people wear when they are trying not to show disappointment. "No. Everything is fine." His eyes searched my face. Looking for the truth. I looked away first. And for the first time since arriving at Harrington Estate, I started wondering whether leaving would hurt less than staying. Humiliation feels different when it happens in front of people who are smiling. The Harrington Christmas Gala arrived 2 nights later. Snow covered the estate like a blanket of white silk. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. The air smelled of pine, expensive perfume, and champagne. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across polished marble floors. Everywhere I looked, people seemed perfect. Perfect clothes. Perfect smiles. Perfect lives. I spent most of the evening moving quietly through the crowd with trays of drinks. After what happened in the library, I had decided to keep my distance from Ethan. It was easier that way. Safer. At least that was what I kept telling myself. Around 8 o'clock, Victoria Harrington stepped onto the grand staircase and tapped a spoon against her glass. The room gradually fell silent. Conversation stopped. Guests turned toward her. She smiled warmly, the way experienced people do when they know every eye in the room belongs to them. "Thank you all for joining our family tonight," she began. Polite applause followed. I continued working near the edge of the ballroom. Then Victoria's gaze found me. My stomach immediately tightened. "Before we continue," she said, "I would like to acknowledge someone who has received quite a bit of attention lately." A few guests exchanged curious looks. Chloe smiled from across the room. My pulse accelerated. "No. Please no." "Grace," Victoria said clearly. "Would you come here for a moment?" Every eye in the ballroom turned toward me. There was no way to refuse. I carefully placed my tray on a nearby table and walked forward. The silence felt endless. When I reached the bottom of the staircase, Victoria smiled down at me. "You have certainly become popular in this household." Soft laughter spread through the crowd. I felt heat rising into my face. "I am just doing my job," I answered quietly. "Of course," Victoria replied. "Although some people seem to believe your ambitions extend beyond housekeeping." More laughter. Sharper this time. The words landed exactly where she intended. Around me, people watched with open curiosity. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. Chloe folded her arms and smiled. "It is impressive, really," she said loudly. "Most people spend years trying to enter this world." Grace managed it with a cleaning cart. The room erupted again. My hands trembled. For one terrible second, I considered walking away. Then I remembered every double shift I had worked. Every bill I had paid. Every sacrifice Liam and I had made. I remembered exactly who I was. Slowly, I lifted my chin. "You are right about one thing," I said. The laughter faded. I did not grow up in this world. Silence returned. Guests leaned forward slightly. Listening. I grew up learning that character matters more than status. That respect should be earned, not inherited. And that judging people without knowing them says far more about the judge than the person being judged. Nobody laughed this time. Victoria's smile disappeared. Chloe's expression hardened. The ballroom became so quiet I could hear the string quartet stop playing. Then a familiar voice broke the silence. She is absolutely right. Every head turned. Ethan stood near the center of the room. And for the first time all evening, he was no longer silent. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from the place they wanted to stay. The ballroom remained silent after Ethan spoke. Hundreds of guests stood frozen beneath the chandeliers. Nobody seemed quite sure what would happen next. Ethan walked forward slowly, his gaze fixed on Victoria and Chloe. Grace has done nothing wrong, he said calmly. And she deserves better than this. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt strangely late. Victoria's expression hardened. Ethan. No. He shook his head. Not tonight. The room seemed to hold its breath. For months people have spread rumors about someone who has done nothing except work hard and treat others with respect. Chloe laughed nervously. You cannot be serious. Ethan looked directly at her. I have never been more serious. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others quietly looked away. Nobody wanted to become part of the confrontation. I stood motionless near the staircase, my heart pounding. Part of me appreciated what Ethan was doing. Another part could not forget all the months that came before. The whispers. The accusations. The silence. Victoria descended the staircase with perfect composure. You are allowing emotions to cloud your judgment. No, Ethan replied. I am finally using it. The tension in the room became unbearable. I realized something then. This was no longer about me. It was about a family tearing itself apart in public. And I wanted no part of it. Quietly, I stepped backward. Then another step. Nobody noticed. Their attention remained fixed on Ethan and Victoria. Within seconds, I slipped through a side door and into an empty hallway. The sudden silence felt overwhelming. My chest tightened. Tears threatened to rise, but I refused to let them. I had cried enough over people who never truly knew me. 20 minutes later, I sat alone in the staff parking lot inside my Honda. Snowflakes drifted across the windshield. The engine remained off. The cold seeped through the glass. I stared at the glowing mansion in the distance. For months, that place had felt like a second home. Somewhere along the way, it had become something else. Somewhere I no longer recognized. My phone buzzed. Ethan. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A text message appeared seconds later. Are you okay? I closed my eyes. Another message followed. Please talk to me. Then another. Grace, where are you? The concern was genuine. I knew that. But concern could not erase everything that had happened. Slowly, I opened my email application. My hands trembled as I typed. Dear Mrs. Dawson, effective immediately, I am resigning from my position at Harrington Estate. Thank you for the opportunity and for your kindness throughout my employment. Sincerely, Grace Parker. I read it 3 times before pressing send. The message disappeared. Just like that. 8 months reduced to a few sentences. My phone rang again. Ethan. This time I turned the device face down on the passenger seat. Snow continued falling outside. Soft. Quiet. Final. For the first time in months, nobody was watching me. Nobody was judging me. Nobody was deciding who they thought I was. I started the engine and pulled away from the estate. As the mansion disappeared in my rearview mirror, I told myself I was doing the right thing. But when I reached the end of the driveway, I glanced back one last time. And for the first time since I met Ethan Harrington, I realized leaving him hurt far more than leaving his world. The truth has a strange habit of appearing after people have already made up their minds. The first week after I left Harrington Estate felt unreal. My apartment seemed smaller somehow. Quieter. Every morning I woke up expecting to drive through the estate gates. Every evening I caught myself wondering whether Ethan was working late in his office or drinking coffee in the library. Then I would remind myself that none of it mattered anymore. I had made my choice. Life moved forward. I found temporary work helping at a neighborhood community center while searching for something permanent. The pay was lower, but the people were kind. Nobody cared who I knew. Nobody whispered when I entered a room. It felt peaceful. Meanwhile, back at the estate, something unexpected was happening. I learned about it weeks later. Apparently, Ethan had demanded to see the entire investigation file Victoria's team had assembled about me. Every page. Every interview. Every financial record. Everything. They gave it to him believing it would confirm their suspicions. Instead, it destroyed them. There were no secret accounts. No wealthy relatives. No hidden motives. What the file revealed was something entirely different. It showed every extra shift I had worked over the past 5 years. Every payment sent toward Liam's education. Every donation I had quietly made to a local food pantry, even during months when money was tight. It showed hospital bills I had helped an elderly neighbor pay after she lost her husband. Bills I never told anyone about. It showed letters from former employers describing me as dependable, honest, and hardworking. It showed a life filled with ordinary sacrifices that nobody had bothered to notice before. Victoria read the same file. So did Chloe. At first they dismissed it. Then more information appeared. Mrs. Dawson informed them that several staff members had personally witnessed me helping coworkers cover emergency expenses without ever asking for recognition. A maintenance worker revealed that I had spent weekends organizing fundraisers for struggling families in the area. A local teacher contacted the estate after hearing rumors about me. She explained how I had anonymously purchased winter coats for children whose parents could not afford them. Piece by piece, the image they created began falling apart. The gold digger they imagined did not exist. The problem was that the real version of me was far more difficult to dismiss. One snowy afternoon, Victoria visited the community center where I volunteered. She did not announce herself. She simply observed from a distance. She watched me helping children with homework. She watched me serve meals. She watched me spend nearly an hour comforting an elderly woman who had nobody else to talk to. Later, she left without saying a word. That evening, according to Mrs. Dawson, Victoria sat alone in the estate library for almost 3 hours. She barely spoke during dinner. Even Chloe seemed quieter than usual. For the first time, both women were being forced to confront a possibility they had never considered. What if they had been completely wrong? What if the person they judged most harshly was actually the person with the strongest character in the room? And while they struggled with those questions, Ethan was dealing with one of his own. Because by then, he had finally realized something that money could not fix. He knew exactly who I was. The problem was that I was gone. Some choices cost money. Others cost family. Ethan discovered the difference in January. By then, nearly a month had passed since I left Harrington Estate. The holidays were over. Snow still covered the city, but the celebrations had faded. Real life had returned. Mine felt quieter. Simpler. His felt like a storm waiting to break. I did not know it at the time, but the confrontation happened during a board meeting at Harrington Industries. The company headquarters occupied the top 40 floors of a glass tower overlooking Manhattan. It was the kind of place where billion-dollar decisions were made before lunch. Victoria expected Ethan to move forward as if nothing had happened. She expected him to focus on business, protect the family image, and forget about the woman who had complicated everything. Instead, he walked into the meeting carrying a folder. The same folder that contained every detail of the investigation they had conducted about me. Every page. Every accusation. Every false assumption. When the meeting ended, he requested a private conversation with Victoria. Chloe joined them. Neither woman expected what came next. "You were wrong," Ethan said simply. Victoria folded her arms. "About what?" "About Grace." Silence filled the room. "This again?" Chloe asked. "Yes," Ethan replied. "This again." He placed the investigation file on the table. "You spent months trying to prove she was manipulating me." Neither woman spoke. "You searched her finances. Her history. Her relationships. You found absolutely nothing." Victoria's expression remained calm. "We were protecting you." Ethan shook his head. "No. You were judging someone because she did not belong to your world." Chloe looked away. Victoria stared at the file without touching it. For the first time, neither had an argument ready. The truth had taken that away from them. "What exactly do you want from us?" Victoria finally asked. Ethan's answer came immediately. "An apology." Chloe laughed softly. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." The room fell silent again. Then Victoria said something Ethan never expected. "And if we refuse?" Ethan looked at the city skyline through the windows behind them. When he turned back, his decision was already made. "Then I am done." Neither woman understood. "Done with what?" Chloe asked. "All of it." Ethan's voice remained calm. "The board position. The succession plan. Every expectation attached to my last name." Victoria's face went pale. "You would walk away from everything?" "If everything requires me to become someone I do not respect, yes." The words hit harder than any argument could have. For years, the family business had been his future. His responsibility. His identity. Now he was willing to leave it behind. Not because of money. Because of principles. Because somewhere along the way, he had fallen in love with a woman who valued character more than status. The conversation ended badly. Nobody changed their position that day. But something fundamental shifted. Ethan walked out of the building knowing exactly what mattered to him. For the first time in his life, it was not the company. It was not the fortune. It was not the family name. That evening, he sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the city. The lights of Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the windows. His phone rested in his hand. My contact information still sat untouched on the screen. He had called dozens of times over the past month. I never answered. Slowly, he opened a blank message. Then he typed 7 words. "I should have protected you sooner, Grace." He stared at the message for a long time before pressing send. The hardest apologies are the ones nobody asks for. February arrived with cold mornings and gray skies. The city moved through its routines while lives quietly changed beneath the surface. I never replied to Ethan's message. Not because I hated him. The truth was more complicated. Every time I looked at those 7 words, I remembered how much they meant. And how much they hurt. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening inside the Harrington family. Victoria could no longer ignore what she had learned. The evidence was everywhere. Not in reports. Not in investigations. In people. Real people. One afternoon, she attended a charity board meeting downtown. During a discussion about community outreach programs, an elderly woman approached her afterward. They exchanged polite conversation until the woman mentioned my name. Victoria immediately became still. "You know Grace Parker?" she asked. The woman smiled. "Know her? She helped save my apartment." Victoria frowned slightly. The woman explained how rising medical expenses had nearly forced her from her home after her husband passed away. An anonymous donor had quietly covered several months of rent until she recovered financially. The donor's identity remained hidden for nearly a year. Eventually she discovered it was me. Victoria listened without interrupting. 2 days later, another story found her. Then another. A former coworker spoke about how I had organized a fundraiser after a family lost everything in a fire. A teacher described how I spent weekends tutoring struggling students. A nurse explained how I regularly delivered meals to homebound seniors without ever posting about it online or seeking recognition. Each story sounded impossible to dismiss because none of the people knew each other. Yet every story described the same person. The same woman they had labeled selfish. The same woman they had accused of chasing money. The contradictions became unbearable. Even Chloe began changing. One afternoon she visited the community center where I volunteered. She arrived wearing designer sunglasses and enough confidence for 3 people. She left 2 hours later, unusually quiet. Later, she admitted to Victoria that she had watched me spend an entire afternoon helping children prepare for school presentations. No cameras. No publicity. No audience. Just kindness. I do not understand her, Chloe confessed. Victoria looked out the window. That is because we never tried. The realization settled heavily between them. For months they had judged me based on assumptions. They had looked at my job title and decided they already knew my story. They never bothered asking who I was. Back at the community center, I remained unaware of most of this. My life continued moving forward. Liam was thriving at college. I was helping coordinate a literacy program for local families. Things felt stable again. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon, a familiar black sedan pulled into the parking lot. I noticed it through the front windows while organizing books near the entrance. The vehicle remained parked for several minutes. Nobody stepped out. My heart immediately recognized what my eyes already knew. Ethan. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw him sitting behind the wheel. Motionless. Watching the building. Not intruding. Not demanding. Just waiting. For the first time in months, neither of us was hiding from the truth anymore. The only question that remained was whether some things could still be repaired after being broken. The people who change your life rarely arrive the way you expect. They arrive quietly. Then suddenly you cannot imagine the world without them. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the community center as I stood near the entrance watching the black sedan in the parking lot. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then the driver's door opened. Ethan stepped out into the rain. No security team. No assistants. No expensive entourage. Just Ethan. He crossed the parking lot slowly and stopped a few feet from the glass doors. I opened them before I could change my mind. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other. Months of hurt. Months of silence. Months of things left unsaid. Hi, Grace. His voice was softer than I remembered. Hi. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his coat. He looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent a long time carrying regret. I owe you an apology, he said. You do not owe me anything. He shook his head immediately. That is not true. I stayed silent. I should have protected you sooner, he continued. I thought staying calm would make things better. I thought ignoring the rumors would make them disappear. His eyes met mine. Instead, I left you standing alone. The honesty hurt because it was true. Ethan. Please let me finish. I nodded. I cannot change what happened. I cannot take back those months. But I can tell you that losing you forced me to see everything clearly. The rain continued falling around us. For most of my life, people valued me because of what I owned, he said. You were the first person who cared about who I was. My chest tightened. You helped my brother without asking for recognition. You remembered things nobody else noticed. You listened when you did not have to. I looked away. Grace, you made me a better man. Silence settled between us. Then another voice interrupted. She did. We both turned. Victoria Harrington stood near the sidewalk holding an umbrella. Chloe stood beside her. Neither woman looked comfortable. Victoria approached slowly. I was wrong about you, she said. No excuses. No conditions. Just the truth. I judged you before I knew you. And I am deeply sorry. Chloe nodded. Me too. I stared at them in disbelief. The apology felt genuine. Not perfect. Not magical. But real. For the first time, nobody was pretending. A few weeks later, spring arrived. The snow melted. The city felt brighter. Ethan organized a fundraising event for the community center. Hundreds of people attended. Families. Volunteers. Business leaders. Teachers. Neighbors. Near the end of the evening, Ethan stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. The room gradually became quiet. Then he looked directly at me. Many people assumed Grace wanted something from me, he said. The truth is exactly the opposite. The room listened. When everyone saw a billionaire, she saw a person. When everyone focused on money, she focused on character. And when I made mistakes, she had the courage to walk away. His smile reached his eyes. She is the only person who ever loved me without asking for anything in return. Tears filled my eyes. Ethan stepped down from the stage and stopped in front of me. Grace Parker, he said softly. Will you build a future with me? The applause disappeared. The room disappeared. Everything disappeared except him. I smiled through my tears and nodded. And in that moment, I finally understood something simple. The poorest person in any room is not the one with the least money. It is the one who cannot recognize the value of a good heart standing right in front of him.